Alright guys, in this video we're going to look at subject of the formula, but what that basically means is, let's just say we want to make x the subject of a formula. X is the subject when it is by itself on one side of the equal sign. So you might need to do a bit of rearranging in order to do that. And before we get started, we'll have a quick look at, well, opposites or the inverse operation. So we know if we add something, the opposite of that is to take away, and vice versa. If we multiply something, the opposite of that would be to divide, and so on. If you see something that is square rooted, the opposite of that is to square that thing, and square gets rid of square roots. Just the same way, obviously if it's cube rooted and so on, then the opposite of that would be to cube it. So that's a cube. And that comes from a long line of just trying to remember things like x to the power of a half is the same as the square root of x. And that's why when you square it, it cancels out the square root. But for now, let's not get into the indices. If you want, you can go and look up my video on indices. You're going to know more about that then. But now I'm just going to say that squaring is the opposite of square root. Okay, let's pop straight into an example or a few examples and see what we've got. Alright, here are our first three examples. And in this case we're going to make x the subject, and as you can see, x is not on its own because that 2 is multiplying by the x. And like I said on the previous page, if I want x to be on its own and the 2 has to go, I have to do the opposite to what the 2 is doing, or the inverse operation. So basically what I'm going to do is just divide by 2, and when I divide by 2, x will now be on its own, and then y will be divided by 2. The bit that I skipped out there is simply this. It was 2x, and I've just divided by 2, didn't I? And I didn't just divide one side, I divided both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that cancels out, leaving me with just x on its own, and then I end up with y over 2. Just the same way, I come down here. Well, I'm going to talk this one through in a different way. This is how I'm going to say this one. X was multiplied by 2, and then p was subtracted from it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the last thing that happened, and the last thing that happened was p being subtracted. So the first thing I write down is 2x is equal to 8 plus p. I'm going to add p because I have to do the opposite to what p was doing over here, and p was subtracting, so when it goes over it will add. Now I've just got 2x. 2 is multiplied by x. The best way to get rid of that is to divide by 2, so therefore my final answer now is x is equal to 8 plus p, all of that divided by 2. And that is now finished. X is the subject and it's on its own on that side. This one, even though it looks quite complicated, is actually quite easy because, as you can see, this whole section here, 4FR, they're all multiplying by x. So I'm just going to divide by 4FR. Just divide by the whole lot and it's all going to disappear. So x will now be on its own, pk divided by 4FR, and I divided because it's the opposite of multiplying. Let's look at a bit more complicated examples and then we're going to call it a day. Alright, these are our last few examples, so let's have a quick look at what's going on here. When we look at the first question, you notice that the x is in a bracket. Well, you can't really solve, make x the subject if it's in a bracket. So the first thing you might want to do, You might be tempted to expand the bracket. It's up to you. There are two ways this can go. You can expand the bracket first, or you don't have to. I'm going to choose not to expand the bracket. So if I think about it, x is multiplied by 2, then 3 is taken away from that, and then in brackets all of that's multiplied by 3. So the last thing I did was multiply by 3. So the first thing I'm going to do is divide by 3. So what I'm going to have left is 2x minus 3 is equal to y divided by 3. Easy peasy. Now the bracket is gone because the 3 on the outside that was holding the bracket shut is gone. Now I say it again. X is multiplied by 2 and then 3 is taken away. So the last thing now is subtract 3. So guess what I'm going to do? Yes, I'm going to add 3. So 2x is equal to y divided by 3 add 3. So now this 3 is now over on the other side. It's doing the opposite to what it was doing. Alright, well, you can clearly see the finish now, because what I've got left is 2x is equal to all of that there. I need to get rid of the 2, so I'm going to divide by 2. So therefore my final answer now is x is equal to y divided by 3 plus 3, all of that over 2. Some people might look at that and think it's all messy, but it's the answer. If you want to simplify it, knock yourself out, but for now that's fine. Alright, the next question. Well, we've got a few things to deal with here, because you can clearly see that x is all the way on top here, and not only that, it is squared. So yeah, not really a fun thing to deal with, but let's take it apart piece by piece. So I've got x, it's squared, then it's multiplied by 2, then 6a is added to it, and all of that's divided by 5. So the last thing I said was divide by 5. So the first thing I'm going to do is multiply by 5. So I'll do this one in red. So here we go. So if I multiply by 5, that 5 at the bottom here will now go and multiply by that 9, and it will disappear completely from the left hand side. So we're going to have 2x squared plus 6a is equal to 45. Okay, and I got that 45 from 5 times 9. Okay, I say it again. X squared is times by 2 plus 6a. The last thing I said was add 6a, so I'm going to subtract 6a. So there we go. So on this side I'll just be left with 2x squared. The 6a will now go over there, and it will be subtracting now, doing the opposite to what it was doing. So 45 take away 6a. Now you can clearly guess x, and then it was squared, and then 2 was multiplied by it, so I'm going to divide by 2. So x squared is now on its own. 45 minus 6a, all that divided by 2, because obviously it's doing the opposite. And finally x is squared, and if you remember what I said on the first page, the opposite of square is square root, just the same way the opposite of square root is square. So yes, you guessed it, for x to be on its own now, I have to square root everything on the right hand side. So 45 minus 6a, all of that divided by 2, and that is the final answer for that one. Alright, moving along quite quickly. This one's pretty straightforward. You can see that x minus 2 is being square rooted. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the square root. And I just said 2 seconds ago, opposite of square root is square. So x minus 2 is equal to y squared. All I've done was squared both sides. The square root will disappear. You can see that this is x minus 2, so the first thing we're going to do is add 2, so x is equal to y squared plus 2. And this one is now finished. One last one to look at before we end. is now over here. Another scenario you'll see is, as you can see here, x is on both sides of the equal sign. I need to make x the subject. So I just need one x on one side of the equal sign, and everything else needs to be on the other side. Well, not to panic, we're going to make that straight now. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring all the x's together. So I'm going to keep the u v square x on this side. Now, as you can see here, this vx is being added together. So when I bring it over, well, the v and the x is multiplying but with each other, but on this on the right hand side it's being added. If you don't see a sign in front of something, it's positive, so we know it's adding. I bring it over, it's going to be minus vx, and on this side the lonely minus u square is left on its own. Now that I've got all my x's together, if you're guessing what I'm thinking, you might be guessing right, because I want to make x the subject. I only need one x, and the only way to get one x is to factorize. So if I bring x outside here, in my brackets I'm going to have u v square take away v. And on the right hand side I've still got my minus u square, very lonely over there. Now two x's have become one x. Now if you're worried about your factorization skills, I've got other videos on simple algebra and factorization, so you might want to go and have a look at those. Anyway, I'm just going to bring this straight to the finish now. These two x's multiplying by that whole bracket. So to get rid of that whole bracket so x can finally be alone, I have to divide by that bracket. So x on its own is minus u square. All of that divided by u v square minus v. And this is now done. The video is a bit longer than I really wanted it to be, guys, but I hope I've explained this clear enough for you. If you're not too sure about anything, pop me a question on the link below. Other than that, have a go at a few questions of your own and see what you make of it. I hope this was clear enough for you.